Today on the show, I am delighted to be speaking with Louis Tenenbaum. Louis is the co founder and CEO of Homes Renewed Coalition, which is a DC based advocacy organization. And I've invited Louis on the show to tell us all about it. Welcome, Louis.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's a real pleasure to speak with you.
So tell me about what the coalition does.
The purpose of the coalition, the intention is to increase the number of homes that are usable, available to people across the physical spectrum. We have much change in our population from medical science over the last 40 or 50 years, at the same time that our housing design has been static. And the idea here is to update the housing to meet the real demands of the current population, which is really important in order to allow people to have joyful, dignified lives that match their choices and are economical places for them to live.
So are we talking about aging in place here so that people don't have to move in the future when they become physically less capable?
Absolutely. But aging in place is just kind of one side of a large coin, because the same sorts of conditions that are mobility difficulties or conditions as we age are present in much of the population, but with a little less visibility. So it's about aging in place, but it's also about all kinds of people who exhibit all kinds of conditions that make the current housing stock just not a good match. It's just not a good match.
So the typical way people think about this is, the house has steps that are hard for a person with a wheelchair, or it has narrow hallways or whatever. Does your organization look at things in other aspects, such as, for example, technology, use of technology in the home to make it more accessible, or services and community-based efforts to be part of a community where the housing is going to be?
Absolutely. We've seen, particularly with COVID, right? We've had a real exposure to the fact that safe senior housing really isn't the safety panacea we thought it was. And that opens the door to say, well, what could be better? And what could be better is more economical. What could be better is more desired, highly, people's choice is not to move from the home that they've chosen, whether it's a home they've lived in for a long time or a home they choose later in life or at some other point. It's the house they've chosen. And I think that choice should stick. But COVID also showed us that, for many things that we used to need to get out the door, we may not need to. And in the same way, services that come into the home can be more effective in a home where it's more commodious, where caregiving can be done more easily. And that allows those services to scale and grow at scale. It's basically the network effect. The more people living in their homes and needing and requiring and getting services, the more those services will become innovative. The delivery mechanisms and partnerships that allow those services to come into our homes will grow and scale. And that way they will become more economical because the price will come down.
Right. So does your coalition believe that market forces are inadequate themselves to respond to the demographic trends of aging, and that requires more of a government response and a need to lobby government? Or do you believe we can work with industry to have tract housing being built that is more accessible?
I think that there's no separation between market forces and policy. So market forces, a real estate developer knows to look out for zoning rules and height restrictions and parking requirements in the same way that all other policy, whether it's sewage treatment plants. Policy basically is the social prioritization, right? So if you invest in BART, for example, I know you're in the Bay Area, it changes the real estate value. It changes the transportation systems. It changes the need for gas stations. Right. If you are, they're trying to build new housing of some kind in your area, There's going to be parking rules and so forth. There's going to be water treatment plant necessities. We can't just be dumping raw sewage in the bay. So everything is policy, whether it's culture with the Kennedy Center or whatever local play troop in your area is getting subsidies from government agencies, or it is education, or it is the built environment and infrastructure. It's all policy that influences the market. So I just don't think there's a separation, and the market will go where the policy pushes it. So for example, the background that really led to my work currently is solar collectors, hybrid cars. In parts of California, there was a shift to water saving landscaping. It's policy.
Oh yeah, that's big here.
But the big thing with solar and hybrid cars is tax credits came along, and all of a sudden those industries grew at record numbers and the prices came down. So, there's nothing that Elon Musk doesn't have a policy behind his big business market. He's not a market guy any more than he is a policy follower.
So do you think that, and this is kind of a leading question, but that policymakers haven't put enough attention into accessibility issues around housing? Is that way?
I don't think they've been asked to. I don't think they've been asked to do it in a big way that reflects really the population.
So you don't think that the ADA and fair housing law manifested that result?
I think it made it easy for us to think we've got it taken care of.
We don't.
We don't have it taken care of. So ADA regarding public spaces and the built environment, yeah, we accept that. But on a universal design level, we're all using closed captioning to watch British shows on Netflix because though they speak English, we can't understand it. And we're all using curb cuts for suitcases and bicycles, right? So that's kind of the impact in the broader picture. Fair housing, absolutely not. I was discussing this with somebody the other day. I'll try to remember who. Oh, it's a developer out in Santa Cruz, I think. And I was just saying, putting a percentage of units to make a percentage of units in a building accessible and then have them disappear without a requirement that they're given to someone or allowed to be used by someone who needs them. And second of all, that people grow into these health conditions. That's the whole idea. We grow into it. I don't know, I had surgery on my ankle last year. People say to me, why are you limping? I go, well, because, this is the condition of my life, right? We change. And if you allow all the accessible housing units from a fair housing point of view to disappear to people who want a larger bathroom and then live there for 20 years while somebody else wants to move in the building and that space isn't available, that just doesn't work. We need to make it a larger effort. Fair housing allows us to think it's taken care of. And I don't think it covers it in much at all.
Right. So your coalition is trying to move the needle on this.
We're trying to move the needle, and we're trying to move the needle in a market way. I agree with that. We're trying to get it so that basically two stages, maybe more, but two basic stages. One is that so people over 50 spend a third, 130 or 40 billion dollars on remodeling, and most of them, 88% or 93%, want to remain at home, but they're not doing the right things. There's a study from Home Advisor that shows that they say they're aging in place, but they aren't asking the right things of their contractor. Most of us have a great deal of trouble picturing ourselves into a future that we don't know. We can picture the past and project from the past, but we can't picture a future we don't know. Even if Aunt Bessie had trouble, we're not thinking that we're going to have trouble, right? So since you can't picture yourself into the future, if your designer or contractor comes up and says, well, you're 60 years old, you should remodel your house and consider these issues, you're going to say, I don't worry about it because it's not going to happen to me. Now that puts a big stop on it, and the contractors have learned to just shut up about it because they don't want to be, associated with those issues. But what if the contractor can come in and say, "Hey, there's a less expensive way to remodel your house. If we do it this new way, you can get a tax break from the government." And everybody
So,
goes, "Wow, okay, I'll take it."
so
And
you're
so let me just get to the second stage before you ask your question, please. The second stage is that now the contractors are really familiar with these techniques and they become ubiquitous in remodeling because that's how contractors do things. They do what they've done recently over again.
right. So what you're leading into is the big project that you guys are working on right now. So you're
Yes.
talking about making it easier for contractors to be more proactive in helping people who own homes to do remodeling in a way that's going to be accessible to allow for true aging in place. So
That's
tell us
it.
about
You've hit it on the nail, Stephen.
tell us about the project. What's the big thing?
Well, the project is called, it's HR 7676. It's
Which is
introduced
a law, which is a piece of
a
federal law, right?
federal
Legis
proposed
proposed legislation,
so
right?
you can tell. So there's been almost 8,000 bills introduced this Congress. So
Wow.
over a 2-year period. So they don't all get the attention they deserve, and maybe some of them don't even deserve it, but ours really deserves even more attention, right? So it's called the Home Modifications for Accessibility Act, HR 7676. It's bipartisan. We have Democrat and Republican sponsors. And the basics behind it is that people will be able to use their 401k, IRA, TSP 403b below 59 and a half without tax or penalty at this point, for with a cap, but for eligible modifications to be defined in the regulations later. And that people over 59 and a half get to use that same amount of eligible modification cap to reduce their income and thus their taxes. So if you spend $5,000 and it reduces your income, you take it off your income above the line deduction, that means that you will pay roughly 20% less on that $5,000 because on average, that's an amount of a tax burden is around 20%. And that means that it'll cost you, it'll save you $1,000 on your taxes to spend that if you spend that $5,000. And the idea behind this is that, just exactly that the market forces start pushing this because it allows the contractor to sell it a little cheaper, do it a little cheaper, et cetera.
What's the cap?
Well, the cap is so, Stephen, let me tell you something. It's one of these things that I went into this with a great deal of lucky naivete because I am learning so much right now. So what happens is we kind of proposed this bill, and Charlie Crist's office, the congressman from Florida's office, jumped on it and said, we're going to propose this legislation. And then they take our idea and massage it a little bit into what's called legislative language. And then it goes to something called the Joint Committee on Taxation for a score where they decide how much it will cost the government. And then that continues to be negotiated. So the cap right now has been set at $30,000 per person, but that's subject to negotiation in this. And we're not actually necessarily we're not the principal at the negotiating table. We are kind of pushing levers behind and trying to make sure that our bill remains conceptually about tax and infrastructure. And so we're being very careful not to make it about eligibility, whether it be age or health, or what is that other word? It starts with an E. Not an entitlement. We don't want it to be an entitlement. We want it to be separated from those things and really be about tax, infrastructure, and health. I mean, tax, infrastructure, and housing for the population rather than getting into the weeds of those other eligibility and entitlement criteria.
So if somebody has a 401k with some assets in it, they could tap into this. If somebody is over 59 and a half and they have and they're earning income that is taxable, they could take advantage of it. It
Right.
seems to me
any savings after 59 and a half. And it's really fantastic for people over 71 or 72 when they have what's called a required minimum distribution. So if you kind of going along and all of a sudden you have to take money out, which you didn't realize you'd have to take out this required minimum distribution from your pre-tax savings. Now you get an opportunity to use this money to reduce your tax burden that's growing at that point.
So it sounds encouraging, but it also sounds, and I don't want to be the cynic, but it also sounds to me quite incremental and not really going to help lower income families very much at all. What do you have to say about that?
That's a great observation. Yeah, and the answer is two things. We got to get our foot in the door for, as you said earlier, for legislators to understand and consumers to understand that this is a really significant issue. And we do that at this point. So part of the really important part of using those savings is that we have a white paper written by a PhD economist that's really easy to read and very good, that shows that the lost tax revenues will in fact be balanced by Medicare savings from falls reduction without even getting into rehab, et cetera, reduced use of rehab, et cetera. And that means that this can be viewed as essentially revenue neutral, which makes it mom, apple pie families, older people, everything, and doesn't cost the government a pile of money. And that's what gets it in the door. And then we will start over time seeing how easy this is, how easy it is for contractors to do it. And then my view is that other monies will become available from other sources and for other populations. And second of all, I look at the history of policy like this, and I see that when I was a boy, I remember when airbags were the new option in Cadillacs only. And it started there, kind of at the top of the income bracket in Cadillacs only as an option. And now every car is required. And similarly, more recently, we see backup cameras. I remember when a backup camera I was just incensed that they would allow or bother putting a backup camera on a car. I thought that was the stupidest use of wasted technology. And now the safety that it has been shown so much that they're actually required on all cars. And so we view this as the same sort of path and pattern, that we introduce it in one area where it can be tested without a lot of government spending. And then it will become a more recognized as a value proposition for government to invest.
I see. So what is the role of your coalition in trying to get this legislation through?
Well, so I've had meetings in person and Zoom with 3 Senate offices this week as we're trying to get a companion bill going in the Senate. I've had meetings with like 30 or more congressional offices to discuss this and try to encourage staffers to understand it and spread it through their office and get it approved. We are also, as a coalition, drawing together groups, advocates, sectors that have never really seen each other as co-conspirators before. So we have people from the remodeling industry, Lowe's, for example, contractors, manufacturers of products that are used in accessibility modifications. But we also have some of the big national care agencies and local care agencies like Right at Home and Home Instead. And some of the technology companies are also part of that. So we bring those 3 sectors. So the point is, if your home is more accessible, it's a better place for care to be delivered. And that's of interest to the care companies who have problems with workers' comp and other things about employers. There's actually a study from New Zealand, I think, that shows that 42% fewer caregiver hours are needed in an accessible home. So the beauty of that means that this care company can have much longer clients, because clients, they can spread their money over a longer time to get that. But also it means that the really important family caregiving can be better utilized, more efficiently utilized, less of a burden on family in an accessible home. So we're setting up this infrastructure for the reality of that. And that same data type on why this is a good idea spreads to advocates. So I had a call recently with the Consortium on Constituents with Disabilities, their housing task force, but also like a National Council on Aging and Leading Age and technology groups and so forth. All of these advocacy groups could see the better use of their products in an accessible home. And then also consumers. So one of the things that's disturbed me. So I've been doing accessible remodeling. I did my first project in 1988 for a family of a young man who was paraplegic from a gunshot wound. And I got called in because I knew the family. I knew a realtor like you who knew this family. And I asked the mother of this young man what she needed a carpenter for. I didn't have any idea about accessibility. She said something really significant. She said, I didn't have to be with him in the bathroom before he was injured. I don't want to be in the bathroom with him when he comes home. I want him to be independent. Now, this is 1988. There was no pre-internet. I didn't know what to do. I remodeled the bathroom. He was independent. So he wasn't, Sonny boy who needs help. He was just Sonny boy. And I saw how really significant that was. And I was totally turned on by what I'd done for this family with my hammer and saw. And then a few years later, I read an article about the age wave. And I said, wow, I'll try to carve out a niche for myself among contractors and also get more of that really good feeling to work with people who are older. In the end, most of my work was with families with special needs trusts about cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's disease, amputations from diabetes, spinal cord injuries, ALS, multiple systems atrophy, post-polio syndrome. Those kinds of things is where I got my chops in doing the work, but constantly with this question in mind of, if this is such a good idea, why doesn't anyone ever do it?
Right.
Why don't people do it? Why do people say, oh, that's such a good idea, but then they don't do it? And that led me to study behavioral economics and then come up with this idea that kind of follows from the model of solar and hybrid and so forth to bring policy through incentives to this area. And because behavior change is what we really need.
Right. So I have a couple more questions for you about the coalition specifically. How big is the coalition right now?
Well, paying members is not very many. It's really hard. I would love more members, and there's rates down to $10 or $15 a month for membership. So I encourage everyone to join. So it's not, I guess I would have to say that I'm more focused on getting the work done than I am on growing the coalition. So
fair enough.
With calls like this that I hope that the coalition grows, because there's a couple things. One, growth in the coalition shows legislators that there's interest and concern on this.
Right.
Two, reaching out to your legislators. And if you go to the coalition website, there's a way to press one button and send a bill to your legislator by putting in your zip code. That's really important for us, whether you join or not. See, there I am. I'm downplaying the membership part. But the other side of this is, as long as I've been in this since, as I said, the early 90s, that I really concentrated on this, I've recognized that two things. That one, people with disabilities are pretty active politically, but they don't play in the same sandbox as people who are aging, despite despite the fact that many people see some of the same issues. And second of all, that people in aging, though they are fully recognized as a regularly voting large constituency, have no grassroots going on, or almost none. So, and the second thing I realized in getting into this is that over the years that I saw that the population of people who are older citizens are really large. They're very well recognized as regular and consistent voters and attentive to policy issues, but there's nobody really pulling them into being a grassroots force. So part of my view is if this coalition, as it continues, both as a forum for all the people serving those who are in their homes for an extended period, for life, service providers, but also that these two groups of people with disabilities and aging consumers can join forces and become the recognized powerhouse they really can be for all kinds of policies, because we're not getting enough credit. And older consumers are represented by large organizations, but they don't really do it as a grassroots. They're preserving Social Security and Medicare, and those are long standing but functionally old institutions, and we've got many more issues than those.
Does the proposed legislation provide for an implementation process that will get the word out to your average contractor in Omaha, Nebraska about the availability of these funds?
Well, first of all, those contractors are my main members. So the word will get out to those people. There's like 4 or 5 different training programs for accessibility for certified aging in place specialists, certified environmental access consultant, certified living in place professional. There's like 5 different training programs, or maybe more, for contractors and designers and occupational therapists to know about these issues and be versed in them. They are some of my strong supporters, and they will get the word out. But also, at some point, your tax advisor will say, hey, or your financial advisor. One of the groups that I think financial advisors should be way more involved in telling people to use some of their resources, regardless of this bill, use some of your resources to make your house a secure place for you to retire, so that you don't have an expectable condition like a stroke or a heart attack or something, and never see the inside of your house again.
Nobody talks about this. Nobody thinks they're ever going to be a person who has a limited physical capacity. Nobody, and you were talking before about the difference between the disability community advocacy and the aging people advocacy. And it has to do with perception of what it means to have a limiting. I know folks who are seniors who have more significant physical limitations than folks who self-identify as being disabled. So It's a problem, right?
Well, I mean, I wrote a blog years ago about, I was at the post office in the place I live, and there was a person who had a placard for parking, who got out of their car and walked in and walked back out. Now, I don't know, maybe the placard was for somebody else, but they were using the space for a person with disabilities to park. And then there was this other person who didn't have a placard, but really had trouble with mobility problems. And they fought their way in and back out, So it's so much about self-perception. And what I'm doing with this bill, as much as I've been an advocate for universal design and so forth, what I'm doing with this bill is kind of like leapfrogging over that and saying, let's not try to change attitudes. Let's just get people to do their houses. So the goal of the coalition, the mission, is to increase the number of houses that are prepared for people of modern longevity. Right. That's it. It's about the reality of the population and our housing. It's not about trying to get people to be wiser.
Yeah. And another thing you pointed out on your website, which I think is really important to think about here, is that more and more medical services are being pushed into people's houses now. And that comes with, when you're suddenly faced with having to do home dialysis or see a BiPAP machine or respiratory devices, you're already in stress and trauma. If you've gotten your home, you don't want to have to deal with making your home accessible, or God forbid, having to move or stay with family. Wouldn't it be better if you had already dealt with this by the virtue of being able to take advantage of this new tax
Absolutely.
break?
We need to make sure that this is available to people in reactive situations, but we also really want to grow the proactive side, changing the narrative and changing, what are typical building techniques at the same time. I was on a podcast last week, and the interviewer said, most people start thinking about accessibility while they're riding home after discharge. you know?
Right,
And
exactly.
as a contractor, that's a really poor time for us to gather and make thoughtful decisions, get design choices in front of people, selections, order materials, produce drawings, get a permit, and schedule the various contractors and special orders. Those are the things I know how to do as a contractor, and they don't happen on a dime.
Wow, Louis, we're out of time. I can't believe it. Before I let you go, can you tell my listeners if they want to tell them what the website is they should go to if they want to sign on to support this legislative drive and learn more about your work?
Sure. The website is homesrenewedcoalition.com. Call me, my email's on there, write me. But sign up for your congressperson, let them know, join the coalition, send us or get in touch with me if you have what I call grass tops. If you are really familiar with an influencer, let us in on, introduce us, whether it's a congressional staff person or someone like that, let us in on that connection so that we can be really thoughtful about pursuing it. Those are the things we need. And more than that, just know that we can change the world, you know?
Thank you for being on my show today, Louis.
It's a real pleasure to get to, not just to be interviewed with you and spend this time, but to get to know you. I really
Well,
appreciate it.
thank you. Thank you so much.